We like that. Sally, don't tell me what to do. Oh, wow. All right. Sour sticks. Thank you so much. Who sent it? We will never know. YL. Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here even for a second. So thank you, Vesa Goshigda. Good to be back. Good to have you back, my man. All right, so some bakiman sour sticks. Strawberry flavor sour sticks, so thank you. I was in Mexico for 2 weeks. Welcome back. Welcome back. Glad that you're safe. Do you know how long people want? Well, it has been sent. Zach, hello and welcome. You can schicken alles. Boss Nation. Hey G, bist Fra? Ja, nooit bij jou, nooit niet. Was mijn pra. Ik ben pra. Alright. Alright, the videos we got down to reviewen. The problem is that I can't stop this. Essen. This is like something was Furt. Furt 1, nehmen wir noch eins. Nicht Stammcandy. Day candy. Special sour sticks. Is like something crazy. I don't know what it is. But definitely something. Alright, we got review on Friday Wiesel. Got an interview mit Naftuli Moster. Ich habe noch gar nicht gehört Naftuli Mosters, wie heißt das? Points of views, echt. Ich weiß nur, als ist for education. Und ich bin ein größer Proponent, als Kinder sollen bekommen Education. In Education meint nicht, dass was ich meine in Education. A Kind's brain ist wie Jelly. Es lernt sich, es ist ein Sponge, absorbt alles. So man darf es geben, genug Sachen, als wir wissen, was hat lieb und was will werden, wenn es wird größer. Ich bin pro-Israel. Ich bin America first, to be honest. Und noch dem, of course. But land-wise, America first. All right. Let's get into it.
Yes, I requested this interview, and you know, to many in the
But the sound wie weggegangen von Jens. So, lass mal sehen, von wo weggegangen und wo sein Point of View ist.
community, I'm still that kind of like boogeyman, and I felt like it's important for people to know that.
Okay. Okay.
Which is the world perspectives. I have no city, and oftentimes Hasidic Judaism, which is the world that I come from. I have no agenda except to create dialogue, understanding, and new perspectives. Recently, I was approached by Naftuli Moster, a figure who, I think it's fair to say, is considered controversial in the Hasidic community. He asked me to interview him, hoping to share his personal journey as an ex-Hasidic person who has gone through significant transformation over the years. After some thought, I agreed to the conversation. Naftuli became well known as the founder of Yafed, which stands for Young Advocates for Fair Education, a group that pressured the government to enforce education standards in Hasidic boys' schools. This made him...
You never heard of him, Brooklyn? Again, ich weiß nicht, wo gewesen in reality. Ich weiß nur einmal gerät, als will machen secular education für Kinder. Kinder dürfen education. Pinklich wie Sache oder wie wenig oder exactly weiß ich nicht. Ich weiß nur, dass die Menschen, die sind gewesen in der jiddische Welt, aber eben nicht lieb gehabt. So.
Shall we say, quite unpopular within the community. He led Yafed until stepping down in 2022. I've had my own discussions with him, shall we say, disagreements, which we discussed on the Jewish Currents podcast. Since then, he's gone on to launch Shtetl, an online journal reporting on the Haredi world. How was that? Was that fair?
Yeah, great.
Okay. Well, hi.
Yossi. Hello and welcome. Cholly, wieso sie lot jenem aran in the situation? Like, was I fair? I like that.
How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me and for agreeing to sit down with me.
You know, we've had different views on the whole education.
I don't know if he snitched on it. Ich meine, is gewesen educational advocate for education. which I agree. Again, ich agree nicht jede Sache, aber ich weiß nicht exactly, but
issue, but I feel like we've often had fruitful discussions. One thing I have tried to avoid on my YouTube channel is having a fight with someone. And sometimes I have no problem having a discussion with someone I disagree with. I just never wanted to have like a contentious discussion. And anyway, that's a part of why I've often refrained from inviting guests who have different views than me, even though people have encouraged me to do so. But anyway, I want to start from the beginning of your story so viewers get to know you a little bit. Do you want to start from the beginning of where you grew up?
First, I wanted to say thank you for having me. And yes, I requested this this interview, which is not so common for me to do. You know, as you probably know, in the past decade or so or more, basically, I've done interviews all the time. Especially
Zach, sagst jetzt, Adias bekommen a gute education, kannst du nicht reden auf die Menschen, die so nicht bekommen gute education. You simply cannot say a word.
for Yafed, and I usually didn't have to request.
Yeah, he was, ich weiß, weil ich bin gewesen einmal in Albany, in Mogere dort etwas wegen education. The Hasidische sind gegangen hin, etwas advocaten, and he was against something, so I know that he was involved.
It. But in this case, I felt like I wanted to specifically get on and talk about my work that I've done in the past and sort of how, you know, I've evolved.
In by the way, man kann gewohnt werden, du hast Sachen, wo sie bechlall nicht gewähnt, in a sense. Like, Menschen legen darauf, als is a certain Weg, is a certain Sach, hat gesucht. Meine Jana sehr gesucht. So let's see.
Because to this day, I still get a lot of emails, text messages.
I am a Hasidic kid like everyone else, and I have good education. Okay, so die hast good education. Redt nicht von dir. Redt von den anderen, was haben nicht education.
Messages.
In the Zach, die hast bekommen a good education. I think you need to sit this one out.
And all kinds of things. Anytime something happens in the community, in the Haredi community, especially if it involves education, and, you know, to many in the community, I'm still that kind of like boogeyman, you know, like, and I felt like it's important for people to know that I've moved on. And not only have I moved on, but the truth is I have some regrets about how I went about my advocacy. And frankly, I probably would have even been more successful if I had done things differently. So I wanted to sort of put that out there, and we'll talk about that. Second, specifically...
Holly, wie sucht right away, als weiß, als gemein wrong mit ein paar Sachen. This is nice. That's nice. That means that he's not stuck in his ways, you know? Sag mal, wenn man ist jung und man hat andere views, act man a certain Weg, man wird älter.
With you, I felt...
Oh, hold on. Oy, it is a victim.
Like you would uniquely be able to relate to my evolution. You know, I followed your work for some time.
Redt nicht von the ones von wie, I guess, die kimmst. Redt escher von Satmer, mainly. Maybe others, I don't know.
Obviously, and I know you followed some of mine. But I don't know if you remember, but about 15 years ago, you and I were together fundraising for Footsteps.
I do remember.
You know, at a parlor meeting. And
it was a fancy thing, right?
Yeah, like many. You know, and shortly after, you sort of took like this sort of a drastically different journey. And to some...
Chaim, English is nicht nur education. Like, education meint nicht nur kennen English. Education meint auch, as du Menschen was haben hobbies and fields that they would be good in, oi man gets an education. Lass mal sagen, a computer programmer, weil es nicht bekommen der education, he'll never become a computer programmer. He will always feel not fulfilled. So that's all.
To some degree, I judged you for it. I felt...
Zach, that's your opinion as an all attention-seeking situation. All right, that's you. But let me hear what says.
Like maybe you were jealous of the success of Footsteps, or eventually jealous of me even. And, you know, like we sort of like went on completely different journeys. But now I'm actually beginning to appreciate your perspective a lot more. And I felt like I wanted to come here and tell you that. And also, you know, of course, speak to your viewers about it as...
Most probably for us Friday, I'm just saying I'm not saying this as an effect. Most probably for us the ethnic of the communities, because the business is in the community. Ken sie an ich rede nicht von ihr personal, ich rede, wie sie gekickt aus. Sie hat a guided tour, so sie gemacht Schule mit der Matzev, maybe.
Well. So,
Zach, what's your GPA average? Good one, Brooklyn.
you asked me to sort of start from the beginning, take you through my, journey and how I sort of got to where I am. So, I grew up in the Hasidic community in Borough Park.
Chaim, there is certain, wenn ich gesagt das Wort Hobby, meint nicht schappen, fliegen und liegen in a bag. Sie do certain Sachen, als so wie ein Mensch hat a Hobby, ich do Menschen, die sind naturally get in Sachen. But, sie dürfen werden introduced. Zieh es. Wenn man ist älter, ist schon over. Kinder haben einen certain Weg. Sie können absorben. Das ist, was Kinder lernen sich. So, ob einer will gewinnen, ein guter Computerprogrammer oder andere Sachen, darf ich heraussagen, was, sie wollten bekommen die richtige Education, they would be fulfilled in their life.
The middle child of 17 kids. I was part of the Belz Hasidic sect. It's very large in Israel. Anyone who's visited Israel, chances are they went to see what we often sort of nicknamed the Beis HaMikdash, because the shul is so magnificent and it has a little bit of a resemblance to the sort of the second temple,
Joseph.
or at least how people draw it. And then at about the age 21, I sort of felt,
I go usually in the morning live and then at night live. Just saying.
I began thinking differently and questioning my upbringing. And not only that, I actually felt, betrayed by the system where I was raised in. And of course, my biggest issue was the yeshiva education, where, I felt here I was trying to go to college, get a degree with the goal of becoming a psychologist. And I felt like I was like literally starting from scratch, like from elementary level. I had a
Another cult. Brooklyn.
broken English. I had no high school diploma. I had no understanding even of how college operates, no foundational knowledge that sort of would help me through the college, even the application process, let alone actual college. So, yeah, I was pretty angry at the time, and I felt like I had
Yeah, there's a Naftuli Moster.
nothing to lose.
And it sounds like he left the activism field. And kommt sich du, I wouldn't say verämpfern, but ich meine, kommt du mehr zu leveln the playing field. Like, zu sagen, wo seine Opinion ist gewesen oder wo gewollt ihn. Nicht zu hören, Stampf in der Gas.
Because I already felt sort of disowned or shunned by the community anyway. So I figured,
He doesn't sound too bitter to me. It just must be.
I can go and
Zach.
fight this battle,
Nice.
Now, the truth is, even back then, I understood that ideally, at least, change should sort of quote unquote come from within. And I did make some attempts at it, but you have to understand, like, I didn't come from like a powerful family or family of askunim and people with connections.
Activists.
My family, we were actually rebbish, but like a small rebel family. It's like we come from big royalty, but here my father had a small shul, and it wasn't like he had a big following or anything like that. We had a very large family, but no.
I think it's a good education, but it's not given in a good way. The kids hate English and they don't listen. Well, der nimmst ein Kind, der legt ihm an 7 Mal in der Früh in der Klasse und lernt ein Subject den ganzen Tag. In sei sehen, als man nimmt es nicht serious, why would they take it serious as well?
Connections, no, askunis, as in, like a form of advocacy in the Haredi world. So take, for example, someone like Tzvi Gluck from Hamudim. I'm sure you know the organization. He's not your typical Hasidic guy, and in theory, it would be hard for him to sort of bring change from within. But he comes from a very strong, powerful family with strong connections. And I think that enabled him to sort of build up this very strong organization, a very admirable organization, doing that kind of work from within the community. So I didn't have any of that. So I was sort of starting, scraping together, a team or a group of people. And you can imagine it ends up being people who are disenchanted with the community, people who, in fact, I would say in some ways, people who had zero sort of appreciation for the Haredi way of life, and perhaps, would like to see it destroyed in some kind of way. I'm not trying to say in like the most physical way. And I found myself sort of being in that corner with these kinds of allies, among the grassroots activist kind of people. And this kind of mentality guided my work for many years. And as you know, we made some progress on the, battlefront, and then The yeshivas pushed back quite successfully to this, until this point still. But over time, I lost interest in it, and I actually became quite, regretful about some of the work that I've done, and now I've completely moved away from it.
Come on, it takes a man to say that he regrets some and he moved away from it. Sag mensen wat double down.
But as I mentioned, both people inside the community and people outside the community, they still sort of connect me to this issue. They still think of me as being, even to this day, like I still get messages from people in the community thinking that I'm behind some sort of expose or behind some sort of effort. And I figured like this, I figured I wanted to make it official to announce to the world that I've moved on in more ways than more than one way. In part also because while I was doing the work, I felt like it was hurting my family. I don't just mean my own family. It was a contentious kind of work. But I also mean like my siblings, my parents, my siblings' kids. And of course...
Wel, bij ons, bij Enk, nennt man van de ganze family. So wie in Nordkorea. Man harget aus de ganze family. So ob eine Titapes represents the ganze family.
While I was, doing the work, I could always justify and say, look, I'm not hurting you. I'm just doing advocacy. And you live in an oppressive community.
Ich mein Joseph Krauss versus AIM. Joseph Krauss hat a Sach hate mit weinig education plus other things herangelegt in a blender together plus the internet. Hat mistam ungeheuer mit solchen kann, internet, so es liegt nicht echt on the top front news,
So the backlash, it's the community's fault.
But again, there's things that man darf haben. Und man darf haben solche Menschen.
It's not my fault. But ultimately, it was the work that I was doing. If I weren't doing the work, there would be random people in the community, maybe respected people in the community. And so ultimately, especially now that I'm no longer involved, I figured might as well come out and say it, announce it to the world, so to speak. So that's essentially a big part of why I wanted to come on here and talk.
When
you say that your work hurt people, you want to expand on the ways in which, like, a lot of people will not know exactly what your work was and why it was controversial. Can you unpack that? And also why it hurt your family. Not only that it was controversial, but why, for instance, your family would be hurt because you're doing advocacy.
Exactly.
Can you put the pieces together?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the work I was doing was raising awareness and fighting to improve the secular education of Haredi yeshivas. In theory, I still stand by that goal. I feel like there's no downside in improving the secular education of the Haredi community. I really would like to see that happen, but I do appreciate that we didn't go about it the best way. So we were, it was a big PR effort. It wasn't intentional. For many years, I didn't even know the word PR. I just was sort of getting the word out. Because the logic was as follows, that if I can't get the community leaders themselves to agree to change, then how do we get enough pressure from the outside to get them to accept this kind of change, right? So how do we generate pressure from the outside? Of course, you want government enforcement, right? Especially because the law already required non-public schools to provide a basic education. And the idea was, well, how do we just get them to enforce the law? Well, one way to get them to enforce the law is by generating enough sort of anger among...
Joseph, the problem is, einer was is nicht affected by education, einer was his growth in life hat nicht getan mit education, will never understand someone that darf haben education for sein growth in life. Ich habe es halt mal so gefallen. Einer, was ist schleppt auf ist, but hat sehr lieb zu coden computers, it doesn't affect his job. Sitzt bei der Desk in code. But ob derselbe Mensch will runnen a marathon, und bekommt sein Chayas für runnen a marathon, und kann nicht, is es in his way. So, that's what I'm saying. So, einer, was versteht nicht, ist nicht in seinem Weg, will never understand. So wie einer, was sagt, wouldn't understand der Hingeriger.
the general public to be
CG.
like, wow,
Hello,
there's a
Islam.
law, it's not being enforced, and it's having an impact on all these different communities, then, why don't you enforce the law? So that was sort of like where the whole media effort came about. And of course, we worked on policy and grassroots organizing. We had a lot of legal avenues as well that we were pursuing. So that's what the work was. Now, the community leaders, of course, didn't like it, and because they wanted to preserve the status quo. And as I'll go on to say later, like I actually understand them to some degree, something that I wasn't able to sort of acknowledge and admit at the time, that preservation of the community has a lot of value. And I don't agree necessarily that you must preserve the exact status quo when it comes to education to preserve the community, but I can see where their minds were. So it sort of became this thing that, Naftuli Moster was considered like the Haman of our generation, right? And you can just imagine such a tight-knit community, especially since Moster is not such a common name in the Hasidic community, at least not yet. I have a lot of siblings, and they have a lot.
How many siblings?
I have 16 siblings.
By the way, Joseph, the reason for was man lernt aus Kindersachen, a viele was man darf nicht haben in life, was a stretch the mind. To get ideas. Meint nicht, man darf es nützen für ein ganzes Leben. I'm just saying, like, du subjects, wo du willst, dass Kinder sich lernen, was effend auf. It's effend auf, so widen the mind.
In addition to myself,
Wow.
and probably 80, 90 nephews and nieces. So in the coming years, Moster is going to become a very common name, hopefully. But it wasn't such a common name. So when people heard the name Moster, or I'm just going to imagine, I don't know this example, but I'm going to imagine if my brother wants to do a deal, okay, reaches out to a potential business partner, and they're like, I don't know, this and this Moster, right? And they're like, oh, are you related to that Moster? Oh, well, he's out there, criticizing the community. How do I know you're not on the same page as him? You know what I mean?
Sam.
So, like, I'm giving an example of how that could have potentially hurt family members. As you know, the way shidduchim work, this is the matches in the arranged marriage system, where, it can hurt, again, a similar thing. They try to arrange a shidduch and they hear Moster, they're like, how much are you aligned? And it's sort of seen as a blemish on the family. So those are some of the examples in which it could have hurt, members of my family. And I feel for them. I really do. Again, for a long time, I felt like, well, there's a bigger picture here. Tens of thousands of kids are being denied an education. I get that you don't want to speak out and that maybe it's sort of, you're feeling some of the backlash, but this is still an important cause,
I just want to put it on the record, like where I came from, going back to 15 years ago, which I had my own strong feelings. I think in the end of the day, we both felt very strongly and we were both ready to put ourselves on the line for our perspectives. My view, of course, I was in agreement with you, and I think everyone, including in the community, is in agreement that more secular education or better secular education when there is for that 1 hour or 2 hours would be a good thing. My view was very strongly that this is a very raw nerve, that the moment you approach it with like a ham-fisted way, you're activating like a historical memory of, they're coming again for our way of life, and that they'd close ranks and you'd potentially close the opportunity for organic change that is naturally happening. And by the way, for a very long time, I was very heavily criticized by everyone, including close friends, for viewing it this way. That's how I felt it. And I think my view was often informed by kind of being in the neighborhood.
The problem is mit change. Als man misse schon machen, ist es schon nicht echter Change. Wenn man misst schon, hast du schon nicht kann bereit, it's nicht Change, it's just the Weg, wie es geht. Change, the echte Change ist, man tut das fahr dem. Fahr, der vier Koiden lo machen. Man wartet nicht für den machen, nur dem sieht man nach der vier.
I don't know, I have a very strong sense of the community's need, like it's tender spots where if you push, it's like you've activated that historical memory. And also, Naftuli, I've never wanted from you, by the way, to do any kind of mea culpa, just to put it on the record. I'm interested in understanding your journey. We've had discussions. We've had civil discussions about our disagreements, and my view was always very strongly that the change has
Simcha.
to come from within, and the pushing
Hello and
from
welcome.
outside, especially with the antagonizing outsiders.
Wer geht machen Change von inside? Wer geht sich aufstellen inside und sagen, oh, lass mal machen Change? It never happens. So, ergens wie mit der Geschimmer von den Rosen.
Is going to create a bigger resistance that can possibly counteract what it does. And
Wie viele Menschen schicken sie certain Chadurim, seine Kinder, and they're not really happy, but they don't have a choice. So sie müssen schicken dort dahin, because they, können reingehen in, was heißt that choice und was nicht. We're not getting into that right now. But they are happy, als einer von den Drossen pusht, also wird Change gemacht.
a lot of people were angry at me for that position because, yeah.
Of course, myself included, I didn't appreciate that someone who themselves sort of left the community was essentially giving cover to the Haredi leadership position. But again, I think you were right, certainly to a degree, and that
Joseph, ich meine, Sie kommen von Wilhelmsburg.
back then, early on in the process, there were some Haredi machers or leaders who would speak to me, and they'd say, you're right. There has to be change, but it has to come from within. And not only that, it's actually already happening.
Yeah,
and I'm
sure.
afraid you're going to undermine it. And at the time, I was like, nah, I was dismissing it. No, it wasn't. Change isn't really happening, or it's not coming fast enough. But the truth is, I think it was. In fact, as both you and I know, the Hasidic community and the Haredi community more broadly has undergone significant change in the last decade plus. Perhaps some of it is credit to people like myself, but some of it is completely unrelated. And you can argue that on the issue of education, it's been more of a stalemate, right? And that perhaps it was because of the whole circling the wagon that was happening as a result of our work. So,
Dus je komt jetzt darauf und sagt, oh, I made a mistake here, I made a mistake there, I'm sorry. Das meint, als admit gewinnt wrong. The problem is mit der Education-Sach, als ob sie changen das, all of a sudden jetzt admitten sie, at der letzten 10, 20 Jahre sind sie gewinnt wrong. They're going to be wrong? They're going to admit publicly? They're going to take such a hit on their ego? They're never going to do it. So they'll double down. And fertig.
I totally agree that there's something there. And, in hindsight, yeah. And as I'll tell you more a little bit over this interview, what sort of led me to get that sort of perspective now that that sort of gets me to realize that, there could have been another way, and maybe there still is.
What made you leave Yafed?
It's a good question. One of the biggest things is, because it was so contentious, I did not want to continue doing it as my kid was growing up, and it's ugly, the things that were being said about me in the press. I'm talking about the Haredi press, and of course, just in general, it's the kind of work that your heart rate is always super high. I was, relative to other people, I was managing it quite well. I think, as you know, I was usually trying to bring some joy, fun to it. Sometimes even getting criticism for it because people felt like, oh, you're enjoying it, But I was like, to me, it was more like I had to bring certain lightness
levity,
to it because otherwise it was very, very stressful. So that was one thing. I didn't want my son to grow up in that kind of tense environment. But also the truth is that I didn't like that we had sort of pushed ourselves in this corner where we were so closely aligned with people who were sort of on the far left. There was this sort of understanding, because we didn't have communal leadership support, so we were looking to sort of latch on to people who have some type of power, right, to influence government and so forth. So who was it? It was like people who were on the sort of far left side of the political spectrum. And they have this concept, which I'm sure you've heard, it's called...
Man kann sich herauslernen von dem, die Warfsteine mal weg, die Warfsteine mal raus in der Community, geht ganze zweiten, whoever has the power. Just by default. So sah nicht so wild rausgeworfen, because he might end up totally on the andere Seite, viele wie will nicht an, and you'll regret it.
Called intersectionality, which is We'll support you if you support us. I mean, it goes a little bit further, which it claims like all the different oppressions are connected. But the idea really is, we'll rub your back if you rub ours or whatever, scratch your back or whatever. And it's like, so we have to support things like bail reform or giving licenses to undocumented immigrants so that they would then support secular education for yeshivas. And even while I was at Yafed, I really tried to stay away from it, but there was that sort of expectation. And frankly, I just wasn't on board. I just wasn't on board. And it irked me all along, where it's like, do you support kids getting a secular education? Then support my mission and don't demand in return that I support things that are a little bit far out there when it comes to policy. So, and there were times where I could actually see this kind of alignment, like literally hurting the cause. There was an example. There was this Haredi lawyer. I think it was Litvish. And he used to forward to me all his emails that he sends to Agudath Israel, very well written, legalistic and all of that, where he was criticizing their position and supporting our position for basic secular education, right? So he was clearly showing support. But every so often he'd send me an email and be like, did you really have to align yourself with this and this group? I don't want to name names, but people on the far left, like where he saw us at a press conference or he saw them at our press conference. And I was like, I really wish I didn't. And to this day, I don't know the answer because again, at the time we were completely powerless, and I think the answer is that we should have tried much, much harder to cultivate people from within. And that would have taken a lot more sacrifice on my behalf. I would have had to bury some of my anger and just work with some of these people, even after they sort of pushed me off a few times. But it's still a big question mark.
Wow, that's very interesting. The issue of needing to have strange bedfellows in order to be effective, needing to align yourself with people that maybe you find unsavory or you just don't feel at all sympathetic to their cause or passionate about their cause. You just want your own cause. I think it's something that people who do niche causes relate to and find themselves with that dilemma.
So I guess, wenn einer kommt zu Moised oder etwas und sucht, als will etwas, in die erste nicht aus, geht sich allein mit anderen, wo es viele Ehre geht nicht mit, weil hat nicht kein Breite, weil jener hat der Kanchik, jener hat der Passik, So zweimal kackst davon.
And it can really
Einmal war nicht aussehen und der andere, geht zu a far left in der case.
Wear you down because you end up feeling like, why am I with all of these people we don't even agree? It's just this one issue that brings us together. And a lot of these spaces, not to get sidetracked in politics, but in my experience, a lot of these spaces can also become very almost like censorship based. What you can say, you have to be on board with whatever trendy cause. And that can be, for us with our baggage, can be especially difficult. We've come all this way to be able to say some things.
So true, so true. I'll tell you even more, because this sort of like evolution continued. It's sort of, I think, the most important event was when my son was about 3.5 years old. And I think by then we had a daughter, but she was like a baby. And the question of where we're going to send him to school became a reality. Until then, he was going to this like conservative Jewish daycare. Almost everyone in that daycare, after that year, their kids went on to public school.
Oh.
So we had that question, because it didn't continue. And we had the question, what do we do now? Where do we send them? And it was like the first time it really hit me. This was no longer a hypothetical, kids should get an education and this education. Suddenly I'm like, okay, my kid, where am I sending him? And we pretty quickly realized that there's no way we're sending him to a public school. Like, we were living in East Ramapo at the time, so obviously not East Ramapo, but even any other public school. One of the reasons is because even though he was just receiving most of his education at home, but we could see that he was getting so much joy from his learning his Jewish education, his Jewish roots, Jewish tradition, Jewish knowledge.
Ik heb maar een beetje de vibe, wie mensen back in the day vliegen ze doen, I learn a working boy, niet geen problem. But mijn tochter is een learning boy. Mijn tochter, mijn special tochter. Dat was du, jedem kind dat ik zo geit die mag, ze komt ze aan, ze zeggen zo like, what?
We wouldn't want to deprive him of that, but also we wanted him to be able to relate and have a relationship with his cousins, We have Litvish cousins on my wife's side, Hasidic cousins on my side. And
Can you briefly talk about your marriage, or just so we have a sense of where you two are on the...
yeah, so, my wife comes from the Litvish community, which is ultra-Orthodox or Haredi, but not Hasidic. And I come from the Hasidic community.
How did you meet?
It's a digression.
Okay, we won't go there.
It's not a secret, but it's just I feel like it could end up being a digression. But yes, we met, and it was like it would be considered a mixed marriage within the Haredi world, right? But for us, it worked really well. So that was the sort of the dynamic that we were working with. But it became clear that we also wouldn't send him. That one of the main reasons, to speak bluntly, not to send him to a public school is frankly because most public schools, their education is subpar. Right? So, my wife, who's Miriam, who's an academic and very smart, she put together this like handwritten spreadsheet. Okay. It was on a huge Post-it note in our kitchen. We were living in Rockland at the time. And on the one side, it had the types of all kinds of different schools. And on the other end, it had different criteria or qualities that people think about when they think about schools. So to paint it to you, and I'm sure we have a picture of it somewhere, because I think I took one. But so you had the spectrum of schools on one axis. So you had everything from Hasidic schools to public schools. And, so you had Hasidic, Litvish, modern Orthodox, conservative reform, and then public school. On the other axis, you had things like Jewish education, secular education, screen and video time, which we didn't want, social connection, the cost, of course, and very importantly also demographic trajectory. Okay, in other words, we wanted a place where he wouldn't find himself homeless in a decade or two, which kind of precluded the conservative schools because their trajectory is declining. Okay, so obviously we didn't want him to go to the Hasidic school because I felt very strongly they're not getting a basic secular education, and frankly, he didn't speak Yiddish.
Right, so it's not even an option.
Yeah, but we quickly realized we also didn't want him to go to a public school where he wouldn't get a Jewish education and where the quality is not so great. So eventually we sort of, through this process, we landed on the modern Orthodox school. But first during this process, we also went to see some of the schools. We went to visit some schools. Initially, we were going to go to the conservative route. They failed on the demographic trajectory question, of course. But also, and this is worse, when we inquired and we visited some of these schools, out of nowhere, several people were like telling us as a positive attribute of this school, they're like, oh, they're so great. They welcome trans kids into their schools. And we were like a little bit like shocked by it because think about it. My kid isn't trans. I didn't ask anyone about trans. We're talking about an elementary school. Okay. He was daycare age. Why is this word even coming up in the conversation? So to some of these people, like this idea that there was this assumption that if I am out there.
Was is homeschooling nicht gewesen a Sache auf der List?
Supporting secular education for Hasidic kids, I must also be on the bandwagon. I must also be on board with encouraging trans content and such in the schools. Yeah. It was a big turnoff. And I know people try to downplay this whole, that there was an obsession amongst the left with trans, right? Especially leading up to the 2024 election. But I've experienced it firsthand, My son, during COVID, so before that, he actually went to a non-Jewish outdoor school that had a farm, and they prided themselves on not reading to the kids. It's all outdoors. There's a lot of climbing, there's building, there's hiking. There's a lot of hiking, and of course, playing with the animals or something. So it's all in nature. So my son, even though he was only 3.5, he was a very good reader, very advanced, and that's really the only thing he enjoyed doing. We had to push him out of his comfort zone to go to this school and basically try some other things that a good boy should do. One day, so remember, they didn't read any books by shitta, on principle. One day he came home and he told us that his teachers did read them a book. And it was a book about a boy who wore jewelry, and all that stuff. And then he shared that they also discussed how one rooster on the farm became a hen, or vice versa. I don't know.
Is that possible?
I don't know. But I was furious. Like, it's one thing if you read.
Kind of feels sick. Lass uns sagen, es ist ja möglich. Let's go down the route, es ist ja möglich. Wo darf ein Kind wissen davon? This is so sick.
Books every single day, and 1 out of 100 books is about a trans kid or whatever. For most kids, it would be like the fantasy books they read, you know, the sky is falling or Peppa Pig or whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, there's this kid who. But if you don't read on principle, and then the one time you read, it has to be about, you know, a trans kid. It's like, yeah, we have a real problem. So anyway, so
Sickening.
ultimately, we enrolled him in the modern Orthodox school where we felt he'd be getting the best of both worlds, you know, a great Jewish education, a great secular education. And the community here is on a, you know, on a good trajectory. There's a big, you know, a boom in terms of kids. But also a huge, you know, important component was the social aspect of it. Again, my wife was very strong and had a good vision about this, that one of the things that she missed most from growing up was the social aspect of it. So Shabbos afternoon in particular, right? What does it look like in the Haredi world? You know, no technology. Frankly, many of these families don't have technology even throughout the week. But on Shabbos in particular, you just cross the street, you go to your neighbor's house, you knock on the door, you invite yourself in, or they come to your house, right? And there's something so nice about that, right? That the secular world lacks, right? There's like the loneliness epidemic. Here you have a community and strong social ties and social connection and people caring for one another. You know, it's not like just a GoFundMe. There's like a continuous, you know, care for one another. Until that point, like when my son was in this conservative daycare, we would have to plan weeks in advance just to have a play date with, with another kid.
I know.
Or like when we invited, finally, when we had a play date, we invited a family on Shabbos we said it was like for Shabbos lunch. They'd come to the house and they'd be like a little bit dumbfounded by the fact that there's a whole meal prepared. Like, you know, they thought it was just a regular play date. To them, it was just a regular weekday. So to us, this was very important, and we wanted to fully immerse in this world. So it was pretty abrupt. We picked ourselves up. We moved to this town in New Jersey, right in the middle of this modern Orthodox community. My son was already enrolled in that school and was attending it. And
Darf man geben Credit. It's aufgehoben und gemufft. But sometimes when you want to do something, you got to do it. Kann ich ihm kacken.
that's it.
I like
you know,
that.
on Shabbos, I grabbed my talis, went to the shul, and that's it. You know, we sort of never looked back.
What was your religious journey from Bells to here? Were you religious all through? Anything? There's no judgment, by the way.
No,
whatever
I
your
don't. Well,
answer
there's
is.
definitely no judgment on your part, of course.
Oh
with
yeah,
your
the
viewers.
viewer. Okay,
But
from my
look,
question.
I don't have to, you know, I don't have to sugarcoat it. There was a period where, you know, I had left the Haredi fold, which included left the Haredi observance. And yeah, we largely lived, you know, secular / conservative Jewish lifestyle, you know. So yes, we tried to always hold on to some Shabbos traditions, but not everything, you know. So it was interesting because I'll tell you, one of the things that gave me that kind of ability, I told my wife, if you make the decision that we're moving to a modern Orthodox community and we're immersing in this with the kids in the school and us, I said, just let me know and I'll do it because I've done it once and I could do it again. You know, so that strength when, you know, having gone through that transition out of the Haredi world, which was, as I'm sure you know, extremely, extremely difficult, that also gave us that strength to sort of do it again and for the benefit of the kids. You know,
It's
not
not
to say that we're not appreciating it, to the contrary.
Yeah.
It's been the best decision we've made, but the guiding thing was the kids.
It's very interesting. There's so much to be said. I've always been very interested in ways in which a communal education works. I talk about it a lot on my tours. Besides for what happens in a classroom, what happens in a community to raise children, to educate children, and there were really nice things to be able to raise my son secular, and there were also a lot of ways in which I experienced a profound loss that came from leaving the community. Like it felt like you gain some, you win some. But a lot of the losses is, like you said, the Shabbos culture, the going over to the neighbors, everyone kind of living an enmeshed life. To me, it often felt like modern orthodoxy is like some kind of upper middle class or middle class life that you
Bezahl Alter. JB, how's it going? My internet to do gegeben als a kleiner lag, so...
have to be almost privileged to
Yeah.
be in, and you have
The Sour Sticks is like laughing at me, like smiling at me.
to be married and probably multiple children, but it tries to straddle some of the of both worlds. And to continue to digress, since I've already digressed, and then we're going to get back on topic. I was just listening to a podcast with Naomi Seidman, who you might know her. She's ex-Hasidic, and she always says that like modern Orthodoxy doesn't feel like the real deal. Do you have a comment on that?
I have so much to comment on it. I think it's a big mistake. Again, I'm in this mode of self-reflection, so maybe I'm a little too harsh on myself. Some people say I have a midlife crisis.
Ah,
But
someone just told me that today.
I used to feel the same way. I used to like practically mock this idea of you could leave the Haredi community and become modern Orthodox. I'm like, are you crazy? You left the Haredi community, especially if you left because you don't believe in certain things, you know, whether it's God or the Torah or whatever. It's like, oh, but you're going to become modern Orthodox. I mean, it's the logical conclusion is that you become an atheist and you're completely disassociated with any form of religion. And of course, at this point, I am the farthest from that position. And I almost like, I almost want to get into, how do you say it?
Evangelizing.
Evangelizing.
Alles good. Hello and welcome.
You know, on this, that, you know, look, I've spoken to people who tried to integrate into the modern Orthodox world. It's some of the things you said earlier are true. It's very hard to do it with a low income or with no sort of support. It could be a little cliquey, you know, sometimes.
Oh,
especially when you're trying.
I get that also a bisschen no, he's spilling the beans a little.
To sort of break into a group of people who know each other from the schools they've gone.
Wo sei gesucht bis der Wahl? Als gewinn jing, nicht alles, was getan is proud of. Like, alles gewinn sort of, kiemen von a Gitterplatz, but now that he's older, he would do it a bit different. Auch hat sich gedacht alleinen mit Menschen, wo es nicht agreed mit sei, but it's gedacht alleinen because gedacht power, to teen change. And hat weggemoved zu New Jersey, weil gedacht geben education für seine Kinder, so du steimerens.
To the shuls they've attended, the camps they went to, they have a lot in common. And by the way, not to dismiss also some of the more nuanced things, like they know certain cultural things that we just don't know. I'll give you an example. Like I was once in this little group of a little shul, and people were talking about going to this concert, Motzei Shabbos, of like a secular singer, which is not uncommon in this community, but everyone knew who
Volvi, hello and welcome.
That singer was. I didn't, you know?
Who?
So I don't remember what it was. If I knew, it would probably stay in my memory. But it's like these things, you know.
How are you, Volvi?
Where, and by the way, we're talking 16 years after leaving the Hasidic world. Like, but you can never make up for it. You know, I'm sure you've had this where people would tell you, Frida, you must watch this movie because you missed that as a kid. You should watch it now. And I'm like, I need to catch up on so many movies or other things that I didn't do as a kid while also living my life currently and taking all the new information that we're getting, all the current movies that are becoming, major things that you need to watch.
Yeah.
Yes, the classics. So that's the thing, you know, so there's some truth to it. But at the same time, once you get past this sort of like rigid ideological position of like, if I don't believe in X, Y, or Z, how can I do this? It's actually a pretty good place when you take into account the fact that you grew up Jewish, you're proud to be Jewish, you want your kids to be Jewish, and you want a community, you want a sense of belonging, you want your kids to get a good education.
Geht's hier als das garten event.
And instill good values. Frankly, it's not a bad choice at all. So I'm happy to speak to others, you know, who've left the Haredi world and...
But er sucht, man darf machen Geld. So hat ein gitter Income. Ein Git meine ich zu sagen, ist, dass fit heran dort. Einer, was macht nicht kein Income, hat ein Issue. Was hat man für reden? Darf man zurückgehen zu Open Education? Hello.
Are contemplating it. I think it's not a bad choice.
Maybe it's your next activist project.
Hey, maybe. We'll talk later about my
Ich will wissen, was seine Education ist. Was hat er bekommen? Brooklyn sagt, dass hat ein BA in something.
next chapter.
Yeah. Well, I'm not done with your religious journey. I just have one more question.
Sure.
If you're comfortable speaking to it, does God play a role in your life?
It's a good question. I don't know. Probably not in the traditional sense. Which,
Joseph
by the
hat
way,
das gesehen.
as you and I know, in the Hasidic world, let me turn this to you. What percentage of Hasidim do you think believe in God as described, in the community?
I don't know. I have no idea. It's a good
Come on,
question.
you should know.
Those gedraaid de table ze hier en ze titzig.
The percentage I can't give
Somewhere in New Jersey, it is herausgesucht geherig wie.
you.
No,
What is-
approximate, based on your conversations or based on what other people tell you. Like, how many times have Hasidim told me, like, 90% of the community doesn't believe,
Yeah.
I'm giving, and that's maybe an exaggeration. I'm sure it's like probably 60% or 70%. I don't know. But the point is that there's so much more to it. You can think of this sort of God and the rules as simply something that helps guide a herd of,
Shape.
all animals, right?
Yes.
And, you can see in the animal kingdom, like people, not people, animals, like they live in
Sally.
communities of some sort.
Just
They
a
follow
minute.
certain rituals and rules and whatever. Most of it is just for survival, right? It's evolutionary instinct. And religion does a lot of that really, really well while packaging it in a religious package. But ultimately, I find it actually
Sadly.
ironic that the religious world is more tapped into our evolutionary needs than is the secular world. Just take, for example, like the question of community and loneliness. In the secular world, they really believe that they can substitute all of that with a tablet. I don't know if they believe in it or they've sort of succumbed to it, just given up. And the religious world held on so tightly and fought back. Like, I don't know about you, but I was, of course, laughing at the bans on smartphones and all kinds of things. But whether they knew it or not, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Nein. No. It was not the right thing. Again, cell phones is bad, internet is bad, but so auch het geht. Wenn die suchst für einen, tun schon mal Cellphone, was ist dumme, but noch dem geht hoben mal Cellphone, hat schon alles durchgebrochen, and he's not gonna have walls to fight when I go to a bad website or a good website. That is the mistake. The mistake is, as man gesucht, the phone is user, and that's it. But once you break that gate, no one is there to stop you.
Going around and seeing kids just bury their face in technology.
Yeah.
And there's something very unnatural what it does to the mind and,
Max Spitz
to the behaviors
lives
that
in Teaneck.
it's causing so much harm in
How are you, Max?
society.
Yeah.
Someone actually recently had a blog post about this. I think it was called Das Torah or something on this topic. And they stressed, like, it's not to say that somehow the rabbis knew what it's going to cause in a decade or two or 100 years from
Let's
now
be real.
when they ban television. But there's something there where they understood instinctively that we must preserve our people. We must preserve our way of life because there's something very
In Nordkorea tun man auch schon kein Internet mit kein Phone. Nicht, weil hat Morde von Addiction. Hat Morde als mit Sehende in draußen der Welt und keiner nicht wollen dort sein.
very natural about it. And that's another thing that brings me, that I feel like there's a disconnect between people like myself and others in sort of activism where they have no appreciation for the family unit,
Yossi.
for the community, and everything is up for discussion. Everything can be disrupted and destroyed.
Yeah.
And here you have a community that
Er hat that China closet in the back. Good one, Yossi.
there are so many things that are working for them, so many things that they're doing so well that the outside world is envious.
Great, the rain kept me let down. How we fight it? Jetzt lassen wir das nicht. Jetzt lassen wir das nicht. Jetzt gehen wir weiter. Jetzt gehen wir für den Wok. Jossi, thank you für den Bringen. Für den Machen mich schmeicheln. China Closet. Kannst du auf bis Dienek, aber man bringt dem China Closet.
About. And no, they don't want to. They don't want disruption. You know, they don't want to destroy it. And I don't want to be aligned with people who are seeking to destroy the systems that are working really well.
Yeah. You know, disruption for disruption's sake.
De Weg, wie sie sucht ja, ist es also wie ein Therapist sucht ja. Ja. Like, nie weiß der Therapist, kehrt nicht.
Is kind of a progressive ethos. Like we have to break everything down. It's like almost
Everything in proportion. Exactly. It's
like an idol. And I get so many comments on YouTube and on my other platforms where people are like, they live in the past. Why are they so crazy stuck in the past? I have always believed that there is value to what has been tried and true. Yes,
Right.
it looks old fashioned. Sometimes putting a break on the pace of change has its benefits. Like, oh, throw it all out. It's the 21st century.
100%.
And there is
Aber keiner hält nicht mit auf herauswerfen alles. I'm sure Naftuli hält auch nicht so. Anybody sane person doesn't believe also that. But noch wir tun Narrigkeiten.
there is a lot to re-examine. It's also fair, you know, but at the same time,
She has
there is
a
a value in looking in both directions, to the past and to the future. And I appreciate what you're saying.
Stefanie, sie hat a Piano mit a kleine TV da oben. Weißt du, ich kann sehen.
I want to go back to your journey, which obviously you've been on a long personal journey.
He is against Judaism? No, not even close, no.
When I
I mean, in that video, I'm noch keinem geht reden or anything. In that video, he hasn't said anything about against Judaism.
got to know you, I remember you were getting married, you know, and now your kids are like obviously grade school or whatever, they're school age kids, and you have two.
Yeah.
Can we say that?
Yeah, we have. I have an 8-year-old, almost 8, actually. No, turned 8 today, and then I have one that's turning 5 next month.
Very nice,
Yeah.
sweet. Okay,
Super,
little.
super sweet kids. Yes.
Oh, I'm sure they're sweet kids. They're still pretty little. Yeah.
Yes.
So you're now essentially in that like raising family stage. So what happened in the last few years in your midlife crisis? I'm just using
Well,
your words.
yeah. So you know,
what's been your
right around the time that we sort of moved to New Jersey and switched our kid into the modern Orthodox school, I also was leaving Yafed, and I mentioned to you some of the motivation for it. I didn't feel comfortable having to pander to some of these groups, and I felt like, you know,
He looks so Yiddish. It is Yiddish. So he's looking the way he is.
maybe
I think he has a, I don't know. No, wer macht das Achillik? He was telling a story about transgenderism.
it's time to move on. I would have done it differently at this point, but let me just move on.
So, trans is wie der Dreidel, was fällt nicht auf keinen Satz. Just keep spinning.
But I still had an appetite for sort of challenging the Haredi leadership. In fact, you know, I think I wanted to take a little bit of revenge almost in some way. I felt like they succeeded in stymieing Yafed because all the institutions and the leaders together conspired and worked in unison to oppose us. And I felt like through a media outlet, you know, we could expose them and hold them accountable. And I think some of it was unconscious and subconscious at the time, but, you know, I think it's increasingly something I'm able to process and see where I was really coming. But on paper, I made a pretty good case for why the Haredi community needs a free press. And basically, I argued that, you know, the Haredi world operates like a state within a state. And unlike the rest of society, which, you know, has access to a free press, I mean, say what you will, of course, different media outlets have different biases, but generally speaking, they can report without fear or favor about different powerful people holding power to account, so to speak. And in the Haredi world, that doesn't exist, right? The media tends to be, you know, too integrated in the Haredi world that the leaders have so much power and control over the media. So it's not common and it's not likely for a media outlet to actually hold a leader of the community accountable. Like, what are they going to do? They're going to be like, this rabbi, committed fraud, or this rabbi abused his power. Think of how the New York Times reports about a Congress member or a mayor, right? You're not going to have the Haredi papers do that about their own leaders, who really wield a lot of sort of power and control over their people. So the logic was that that's what we're out to do, right? We had some parameters about like what makes something a shtetl story, especially if it involved investigation. It had to meet one of these criteria. It had to be either about abuse of power or fraud by a sort of communal leader, or similarly by an institution. In other words, from the beginning, we knew we didn't just want to go after random individuals in the community. Oh, this guy did this. Oh, this guy did that, right? Like even when it comes to sex abuse, if there was a communal connection or an institutional connection, then fine, we'd report on it. But otherwise...
Whoa, Chevra, tiny bits, size doesn't matter, okay?
Even from the start, we weren't going to do that.
Ich mache schäuzig von seiner Gläser. Es ist rimless, okay?
And I think all of this is still true. I'm actually a big believer in the importance of a free press to a democratic society. But there
Hat viele die Sache of the
are a few things. First of all,
hold on. Du weißt, die fringes, was hängt da up von der Tier?
I got turned off by how the media operates in some
Noch mal gut werden gefunden zusammen Mama für the interview.
way. I think, there's something very cold and contextless about the way real journalism is done. It doesn't have the same kind of warmth and nuance about a certain issue. Again, it sort of has this idea of like, I don't have to care if this institution is going to fall apart just because, I reported about something wrong they're doing, right? And it's like, it's very cold, right? And I also got to see up close how some of the media works and how they steer their readers, their viewers, their listeners, into a certain place. So, in other words, the institution that's meant to uphold democracy in some cases doesn't exactly do that. I also felt like terrible that in some cases, even though, we were like aiming to report only on like people in power, they're people and they have families, especially in an insular community, and it hurts them. You know what I mean? So I didn't like it. I also felt like it's ironic. Part of my, as we were doing this reporting, one of the ways we would find a story is like I would flip through the Haredi media, magazine.
Sadly, he was looked upon, mit dem umgekickt wie a boogeyman. So he's here to make his case for was nicht kein boogeyman. So for you, it might not be a Sach,
And newspapers, and essentially look for something
Volvi. Woo.
juicy. And as you know, there's always plenty there.
But good one,
But
though.
I would also come across so many nice things in the community, whether it's certain goods and services or charities, or even there's like a program that helps, I forgot what it's called, but it helps.
Sadly, I thought you were going to say he needs to cool down, like maybe go into a cold plunge.
Families whose siblings or kids went
Glenn Livet or the whatever. Hershey Kraus, hello and welcome.
OTD, right?
It's a Belza thing, isn't it?
I don't know. I know in Israel, the
Glenn Livet, a Zwölfer.
Belzer Rebbe is sort of known for this, but I didn't know of this. I don't know who runs
Tripke Illy Eppes kimt vor. All right.
this organization or who it's affiliated with. But you see these things, yes, I'm thinking like, yes, there are real issues in the community, and I really wish that there's a good way to address these issues. But is media exposure, the best way, to go about it, especially when media itself sometimes misses the mark?
Ich will aber reden von seiner education.
I'll give you an example. I was working and I was actually following up on tips about Hatzalah allegedly doing this or that. I'm not even going to go into details. And meanwhile, Pesach last year comes around, and we're by my in-laws in Muncie. Okay, we were already living here. We're by my in-laws in Muncie. The morning of the first day, my son, he was 6 at the time. He always wakes up very early, and regardless of when he goes to sleep, and he's like excited, and he rushes up to his grandmother's bedroom to wake her up to have a read or something to him, and he his head knocks into a sharp-edged banister. Okay, and we hear crying and such, and of course there was blood dripping. It was like a trail.
Oh,
and,
no.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
no.
of course we jump out of bed, we run and help, and after just a little deliberation, I'm like, I'm calling Hatzalah. I call Hatzalah. Within minutes, probably less than 3 minutes, a guy shows up, okay, in his personal vehicle. He's wearing nice Yom Tov pants, You could see his shirt is like only half tucked in. You could see on his eyes he's tired like crazy, probably because he went to sleep very late the night before because of the Seder, right? A minute later, another Hatzalah guy shows up, and they both come in, help selflessly. By that point, the bleeding mostly stopped, and basically they told us with a little bit about an ointment and a Band-Aid, it's probably fine. But again, I'm sure Hatzalah, like almost every entity, they could do better or occasionally make a mistake, but does, doing something that could potentially undermine the invaluable service they provide, which is an envy to anyone outside the Haredi world, like what does that do? Do I want to be, involved in it? Like, and I was turned off because there were people surrounding me in my own orbit who were very sort of militant about it, where it's like to them, if an institution made a mistake or whatever, they wanted to tear it down. And I'm like, I'm not on board. I'm not on board. We were doing a story about, you remember Yankee Daskal? He was a former founder of Shomrim and at some point a member.
Yeah.
And
there was rape allegations, right?
Yes.
Ja. And when we're going to visit in jail, I'll get it, wegen them.
Of an underage girl that was in his sort of custody, so to speak. But when we did the story, I told my reporter, make sure you put in why the community finds this useful, why the community benefits from Shomrim. And you know what? I don't know about you, but growing up in Borough Park, when Borough Park was not fully Hasidish, half of our block was not Jewish and half of Borough Park was not Jewish. I got to tell you, Shomrim provided us a layer of security that, frankly, we didn't feel like we had. If we get beat up on the street and you call it in, and suddenly from a bunch of random local stores, Shomrim members show up to help, it gave such a sense of security and care that we didn't otherwise feel. And I feel like that's important.
Yeah. You touch on such a dilemma because this is a community that has its flaws. It has plenty of its flaws, of course. And there are some systemic, really big issues. Sometimes I'll get emails from people who are in vulnerable places and tell their stories. And they'll say to me, it's really nice that you speak to the positive of the community, but you should know that I suffer with this and that. And for me, I believe them. I know that this is not a perfect world. My work was never about saying, oh, this is a utopia. Everyone should be like them. I think some people want to be like them. Some people want to be like you. Some people want to be like me. I just always like to explore.
And some like me.
The uniquenesses. But it feels like...
I got to say a dumb comment here and there.
Oftentimes we're in this position where if we don't talk about the negativity, if we don't talk about the issues that are hidden under the rug, who else is going to speak to it? And essentially you're complicit. That's sometimes the...
Exactly. Adi bist still sometimes. Wer denn geht reden, wenn nicht dir? Sie nicht dir.
Burden that kind of, I feel like, is placed on me in my work. How can you speak to everyday life without exposing the ugly side? Because I have no interest in hiding things. Yet at the same time, there are so many people that are looking to focus only on that. Shomrim is a good example. Shomrim was always a banal thing to us. It was a community organization where we look after each other, coming from a long history of feeling the need to organize this way. But you talk to outsiders, they have their own police. There's some conspiracy of like their own...
Yes.
Is it that? It was never that to me. What is... And Daskal's story doesn't...
Ich verstehe nicht, weil ist der Head Guy von Shomrim, meint nicht, dass das ist ganz Shomrim. Hat eine Story bei sich in daheim, und etwas gewähnt, und man hat gegengenommen. Es ist nicht die ganze Organisation.
People see it. I can see how people on the outside see it, but at the same time, it's like you said, everything could be seen in the negative light or in the positive light. And the reality is there's a lot of positive.
Menschen noch projecten, weil sie wollten gewähnt der Head von Shomrim, wollten sie getan so. Und wenn sie machen, wenn sie Group, wollten sie getan so.
I want to tell you another story. We did a story about Judge Ruchi Fryer. I'm sure you know of her. Okay.
Yeah, let's tell everyone who she is.
I'll get to that. It was mainly just like a positive story about how she was nominated from like a local district judge to being the Supreme Court judge. Now, being the Supreme Court judge in New York doesn't mean
state level.
It's a state level. Actually, the Supreme Court is one of the lower level courts, but it's bigger than the local district court that she was on. So it was a nice positive story just about that she was nominated to become the judge. So we did that story, and I get a call from an activist, literally, I kid you not, screaming at the top of his lungs, okay, that we did a puff piece about a person, he perceives as bad, okay? And here you have someone like Ruchi Fryer, who, she helped people who've left the community. She founded Ezras Nashim, which is like a female-led version of Hatzalah.
Of the EMS.
Yes, and in her spare time, she became a lawyer and then a judge, in addition to raising what seems like a nice family.
And like 9 children or something, I don't know how many, a lot.
And God forbid, we did a story about her. And, it's just like, I don't know if you're interested in hearing some other stories, but like I have like...
Wait. To clarify, their problem with you covering Ruchi Fryer was as an OTD person, as an outsider activist?
Well, person presented as more insider, but yeah, was definitely wanted to dig, like, God forbid, she can't be a good person. She can't be... They had some complaint that I think that she was against abortion. Okay. It's a valid position, and we don't have to have a hit piece or whatever just because of that, We once did a story about a person who filed a lawsuit someone who alleged that they were abused as a child in a local yeshiva. The lawsuit was public. It was a civil case, so not like a criminal charge. It was for monetary damages. Both the plaintiff and the defendant were named in the lawsuit. I don't know if you know, there's such thing. You could file an anonymous lawsuit. It's called a John Doe or a Jane Doe, but this was public. The person was now something like 31 or 33. So the allegation was that it happened many, many years ago, 20-something years ago. So we did our due diligence. We reached out to both parties, including the plaintiff's lawyer, of course, the defendant, and nobody got back to us by publication or something like that. So we reported the story. Okay, person A accuses person B, and person B once taught at this and this school or something like that. After the story, as journalists, I felt like, we
Why is he dropping so many names? He wasn't dropping any names. And he said public their names.
can't take a position. We have to be neutral about it, right? If the allegation, it's an allegation that goes back decades. So from our perspective, from an accountability perspective, like both the plaintiff and the defendant should be named, especially since they're named in the lawsuit. So anyways, after publication, the alleged victim reaches out and says that he wants his name out. So we frantically consulted experts, and based on what we heard back, we decided that the story is published, we're leaving it as is. We did our due diligence, the lawsuit is public, it's fine. So these activists, who are fighting sex abuse in the community, it seems like they were coordinating with the victim. They suddenly mounted this massive pressure campaign on us to remove it. And they essentially wanted us to submit to their made-up rules. So like, quote unquote, you never name a victim. And again, notice that they say victim, there's never alleged victim. And it's always abuser, there's never alleged abuser. Okay, this has not been adjudicated in court. The guy, it's the first lawsuit. This is an alleged abuser and an alleged victim. And, and I just realized, and of course they love the connection to the school. Oh, he's part of the school. And that's always, and I realized that there are people who have no qualms about, destroying a person's life, destroying the institutions they're affiliated. And if someone doesn't submit to their idea of their purity or whatever on reporting on it, they're willing to destroy them as well. And all this crystallized something in my mind, which is that even though I personally have always insisted on merely improving a little secular education in the Haredi yeshivas, there were plenty of people in my orbit who I can say they probably were totally okay with the community, with the yeshivas being destroyed and going under and being shut down. And I don't want that. Like when I walk in the streets of Borough Park, and I'm not saying I always had this view, but when I do now, I see so much good. I was recently there actually with a journalist. He reached out to me, and again, he thought I'm still involved, and he reached out, and I happened to be in Borough Park. I was like, fine, we'll meet. And I'm walking around the street. You see these kids. It's sort of in the evening. It was in the winter months, so it was early evening. And they're walking around holding books, and they're peering into storefront windows of bookstores. It's like, this is beautiful. This is what you want. Do I agree with everything they're reading? Do I agree that they're not also reading some, they're not also learning some secular education? No, I really do wish that there was some improvement over there. But this is beautiful, and it's undeniable. And so to me, it just felt like I want to move on from this. If I could be helpful in sort of spotlighting the good, and perhaps if there's some way to help bring change from within, great. But if not. Like, I can understand that I may not be that person. I have to move on, do something else, and hope that other people in the community can actually bring change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of us, we have a certain amount of distance that allows us with time to appreciate things that when you're in it, you're hurting because of, if one thing is hurting you in the community, if 5 things are hurting you, then all the other things become null and void. And the distance and release from the pain allows you to see it differently. And then you feel like the fire in your soul that's driving whatever activism dissipates. I have a very short-term anger usually. Like, I feel very strongly about something, and then it dissipates. And then how are you supposed to keep going once you don't feel passionate about it? You stop feeling that pain. Do you feel on a personal level, I want to wrap up the interview, but I just want to ask you on a personal level, do you feel like this whole process that you've just described has been healing or freeing, or is it tormenting, regret-inducing? Like, what's been the personal emotional journey?
It's an interesting question. It's a little bit of everything. It's not sort of hounding me in a way where it's like, hurting me mentally or psychologically or anything like that. I think I'm a pretty healthy person in the way I'm able to sort of process it and hold it all and be able to both go on with my life, try to make adjustments where needed. So I've been able to sort of manage it well, but it's not to say that there isn't like a storm happening, in my head. Obviously it's a big change, to sort of go from being like, no, they can do nothing right, to being like, actually, no, there's a lot they could do right. And by the way, that also means that I'm like, essentially, I don't have a strong footing on what I'm doing next as well. Like, I have some ideas brewing, but it could be destabilizing. But, I'm okay with managing a bunch of things. I guess my years at Yafed did prepare me for being able to handle a tremendous amount of stress. But it's definitely, I think there's definitely some freeing. It's definitely liberating and freeing. First of all, not to be beholden to people who want you to sort of feel a certain way or want you to go after people in a certain way, but also to be like, the Mishnah says, lo alecha hamalacha ligmar, or something like that. Like, it doesn't have to be me. For many years I insisted, no, I have to, like, I was crowned by God or whatever. Like, I have to, this is my mission.
This is your
like,
mission.
Yeah, and it's like, no, it doesn't have to be. If I could be helpful, I'll be helpful. If not, that's okay too. I want to have like a nice life, in this community and with my kids, and it's amazing. I just love it, being a parent. And I think that's...
Kiwi groß ist von ihm. It's just tremendous, als kann sich geben a Rika weg, sehen, was getan wrong, nehmen a neue course in life, seine Kinder young, changing, shows such a big person. Just saying.
A big part that we didn't get to, and maybe for a different time, about how being a parent changes people.
Yeah.
It sort of ignites this need to protect and to provide and it changes your outlook a lot. And I think that a lot of people who are more eager to sort of destroy things, it's because they don't have that instinct.
This is wichtig, als kommt raus. Weil as what he says here, als nicht kann destroyer. Du Menschen, die wollen herubringen das ganze System, weil sie haben nicht lieb zwei Sachen, in beglauen nicht als ein Mensch auch der. Which I respect. Nicht alles ist wrong. Hat sich nur gedacht, alleinen zu Menschen, weil darf etwas Power. Und ich meine, das darf man sich herauslehnen. Die warfst einem heraus oder weg. He's going to align himself with people who have power.
You'll notice that a lot of people who very sort of fanatic or extremist. Yes, exactly.
I don't think, maybe he's going through a midlife crisis, but I'm saying it also takes of a person to change and to say this, and he wanted to come up, so.
There's no value in an institution or in a system when you don't have your own future, at stake.
What about shtetl? You're rethinking that?
Of course, yes. As far as I'm concerned, you can see we haven't published anything. Well, we published one item on, what's her name? I forgot, the singer. I'm sure you've had her before. Ricky Rose.
Oh, really? Oh.
It was a nice, sweet story. And if I could do that, that would be great. I was thinking maybe shtetl could become like a hub for, content creators. I mentioned to you before our interview about possibly turning it into just an archive, no editorializing, no criticizing, no investigating, just Yiddish, archiving Yiddish content, things like that, or not. Yeah, I'm okay with if shtetl, shuts down. I don't have to do that. It would be great if I can keep it going and if I can do something productive and helpful. But if not, that's...
Ze sound wie will, hat a git hart. Will raushelfen. He just got carried away.
Would you consider becoming a lawyer since you have that experience with the stress in your past?
Oh my God, I can't believe you mentioned that. I recently had a mentor of mine just pressure me to do that.
Sadly.
He was like, you must go get the LSATs, you must go.
Maybe you can write it and send it in. Wrong button.
Because I shared with that person how I feel, but the funny
Wo wissen für seine education, wie sie gegangen, was hat getan?
thing is, Frida.
What is shtetl? I don't know. But it seems like as is a publication, man kennt das heranlegen Sachen. Ich weiß nicht. I don't know. A blog, maybe?
A lot of people don't know them. Actually, not by nature confrontational. I grew up as a pretty shy kid. I also like to read a lot. And doing Yafed and all that was very much outside my comfort zone. And yes, people think of me as oh no, this is what he likes to do. And I don't. I don't want to be a lawyer. I feel like it's a pretty adversarial kind of thing. Now, there are all kinds of lawyers, including people who do estates. It doesn't have to be adversarial, but when people tell me I should become a lawyer, clearly it's because
what they're thinking about.
They're thinking it. And frankly, it's they don't realize I actually would love to do something nice, bridge building, community, building and organizing and developing something nice, something positive,
Ich meine, sie darf arbeiten auf, sich heraussetzen und machen einen Plan, wieso das System heranzubringen, welche Education heranzubringen und wieso es implementen in die jüdische Welt. Nicht zu viel, wie sie lassen über den Insight,
Isn't that your first calling with social work?
Well, social work was going to be more like individual counseling,
which is also, it's not like being a shark.
Right, exactly. And, I think that sort of ship has sailed. I never went on to get my MSW or the LCSW, which is required. There are some opportunities, to do coaching or, mentoring and things like that. It's possible. I'm thinking bigger picture. I'm thinking more sort of community-wide, global. I'm a systems kind of guy. But again, I'm not pressuring myself into anything at the moment. I guess I have the luxury a little bit to sort of take a deep breath and sort of carefully plan my next chapter.
What would you expect the reaction to this interview is going to be? Because people have strong feelings about you.
Yeah. I tell people I don't even blame you for having strong feelings. And it may take time for people to feel differently, or they may never. And that's okay. I'm not sort of expecting a welcome or anything. I've lived my life here, but I definitely wouldn't want people to think that it's insincere. That's definitely not something. I think it's, it would be great if people realize that there's genuineness to what I'm saying. And there is, and whether they want to take it and accept it or whatever, it's up to them. I really am not expecting, like I said, to me, it was just sort of my life was so public for 10, 12 years in a certain way. And then I sort of quietly slinked away. And I gave you the example that a relative of mine, a sibling of mine, sent me this screenshot of a text message that was making the rounds in the Haredi world about Naftuli Moster is doing this and that. And it had zero truth to it. It was just because, I became this sort of go-to boogeyman. And I figured, you know what? I should probably go out there and make it clear that from now on, anything like this that you see, it's not me. I'm out. I'm done. I'm proud of a lot of the work that I've done. And, if my son or daughter ever sees this interview, I want them to know, I worked hard. I believed in it, and I still do. I believe that, kids should get a well-rounded education. I think I learned a lot, and I realized that the method could have been done differently. And I would have done it differently if in hindsight. But that's that, yeah.
All I'm going to say to wrap this up is, personally, I very much relate to being able to rethink things. I have done it multiple times in my life, and I think it's a great privilege to be able to do it. It's probably one of the greatest highlights of my leaving the Hasidic community journey is that I was able to rethink my life and rethink it again and again and again.
Yes.
And that is something that we as humans, it's just it's a gift. It's something that, and to be able to give ourselves that freedom to say, I saw it that way and now I'm seeing it differently.
Right.
And I don't know how I'm going to see it in the future. And maybe I'm so freaking wrong right now. And I can only try to keep an open mind.
Right. And I wish more people were able to sort of be okay with changing their minds. We live in such a black and white kind of world now. And it's so hard for people to change their minds, even if they see the truth, So I think if someone gets that out of this interview, I think that would be great.
Exactly, Chaim.
Anything I was supposed to ask you think?
Chaim, I really think so. I really agree with what you're saying.
I should have asked you that I didn't.
No, I think we touched on everything. And it was certainly a lot. And we went over time. I'm mindful of the hour. I see the clock ticking. So
I told you it's going to feel like 15 minutes. I did not think we would stay under.
The question is, what's against Zan education? What's it
an hour was my feeling. That's why I warned you.
And the funny thing is, I could keep going, but I think the points were made. We made the general points, and I really appreciate that you decided to do this interview, because I think it sort of falls outside the kind of scope that you normally do. You profile sort of nice, community events and places and sometimes people. This is different. You had to lean into something that was a little more controversial. And again, you have no idea how people will accept it. People might be upset that you sort of gave me a platform. And again, as far as I'm concerned, it's all fair. It's all fair, I accept it. That's all.
For me, I knew that people would possibly be upset. That wasn't really my concern. I'm trying really hard. Hasidim will have a hard time understanding, to make a point that I'm not here to glorify. I'm trying to have a conversation. And I was a little bit concerned about that. I'm not here to be like, we're always showing only the positive side. I didn't speak to you earlier, now I speak to you. I just never wanted to end up fighting. That's something I never want to do in an interview. That's not my style. I want to have a discussion with someone who, I feel like we can have the world is so full of debate. I just don't want that.
Yep.
But anyway, I really enjoyed talking to you. So
Same.
Thank you so much. Should I link it?
Okay, so Mana, this is done. The interview. רגע, בחייב גם finden, weil ich kann flattering face. So Chaim, so dezelfde Sache, ich hab ihm nicht gekannt, aber das Sache muss auch man nicht sein, das Sachen für Menschen. Also gesucht so, geht her. In die hast du es gehört, wenn du, wie sucht das, רגע. Also, no. Als ihm gegangen eine Message von ihm, ist bechlall nicht ihm. Weil Menschen haben es damals so lieber ihm zu schicken und liken auf ihm. Es sounds wie ein genuine guy. Ist Masber, als geworden herangerobt mit anderen Organisationen. Und das kann geschehen. Wenn die das Power und die das will machen Change. Es ist sehr groß auf ihm zu sagen, als gemacht so mistakes and is proud of what he worked. He sounds like a very nice guy. And I'm glad he's aufgekommen. Ich meine, change nach Sachmenschen's opinion of him, which is important, weil hat an outside job, an outside picture, and Menschen haben lieb zu dumpen, weil schon anyways in draußen. Gesucht so, getan so. Which, yeah. Stark genug gehabt, going to give a like. Friday, a gitte freaking interview. I liked it. But ich halte, man darf geben education. In education, for was jump man straight? Public school education. There is a huge line between education in public school, and geben education. Echt nehmen serious. Auslernen English, auslernen Math, auslernen certain Sachen, was man kann mitnehmen in life. Darf es nur heranbringen.